version of what we've heard from the House. And I've watched the three before, behind closed doors, what was leaked out, public version, the four constitutional experts, and there is not one new thing other than exaggeration, using words like overwhelming, and the dynamic is going to change tomorrow because you're going to finally hear the counterpoint. When you do this in a vacuum and you keep repeating the same thing, you're not going to win this by time of possession. You got to start telling us what's different from what we've heard before. And you're going to finally hear that when we get our counterpoint starting tomorrow.
Well, I am like Senator Barrasso. I am waiting to hear that mountain of overwhelming evidence. And they have a little over 3 hours, I think, yet this evening where they can present that overwhelming evidence. I just can't wait to hear it. So basically true with everything that we've heard. It's been over and over and over again, repetition of the previous day's points, our previous points. But I want to go back because it was brought up, of course, again today, the fact that the president held on to funding for approximately 2 months for lethal aid to Ukraine. And the House managers keep centering on that. They keep going back to that point. But I would remind them that Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. 2014 under the previous administration. That administration had every opportunity to present lethal aid to the Ukrainian people and allow them to push back on Russian invaders. And yet they did not do that. They did not do that for 2 years, folks. 2 years. And yet we're acting like this is something new, that Russia has invaded this vulnerable country. They keep going back to that, but not willing to recognize it was their own party, their own president that refused to take a stand against Russia and instead cozied up to them and decided not to take a stance to help our friends in Ukraine and allow Russia to invade and gain a foothold for 2 years. President Trump has done more for Ukraine in his short time in office than President Obama did when he had the opportunity to provide that aid to the Ukrainian people. Thousands of Ukrainian lives have been lost because President Obama didn't take that stand. President Trump has.
I'll make a short statement. I see that Jay is also right behind us as well. I was a little frustrated with this morning because the previous 2 days they were going through content, but it was the same content over and over. Everybody released content. This morning's focus, from 1 o'clock on, focus was really speculation. It was almost like conspiracy theories and speculation. We think this may be the secret motive behind it, kind of stuff without any facts or basis behind it. And so they spent much of the early hours going through that. And then when they shifted over to what they're calling their second article of impeachment, as they shifted over to that, it was basically trying to make the argument against what the White House team has already said was the reason for this October the 8th letter. I'm disappointed that the House has spent all their time saying, well, we want to go as fast as we possibly could, so we couldn't go to the courts like every other impeachment trial has done to be able to resolve any unresolved issue. They were saying we couldn't go to the courts, so the president said, no, immediately, we're not going to even try because we're going to hurry, then sit on it for a month, and then now send it over to the Senate and tell the Senate, no, you should go to the courts now. You should stretch all this out. You should go get additional witnesses. So it's a very odd process. The typical process, as has been in the past, if they have a problem with the White House, they go to the courts, they resolve it, and then actually have those witnesses actually come, have documents come. They just ignored it flat and said, if you can't go from 0 to 60 immediately, then we're just going to skip it and we're going to impeach you for that as well. That has not been typical. They kept saying that was typical of the past. Clearly, that's not typical, and the timeline shows that to be fact-based. So do look forward to tomorrow and getting a chance to hear the rest of the story and the other side of this perspective.
Senator Barrasso, in terms of it being a flimsy case, what are the specific holes do you see? What are the specific facts that you think the Democrats have not proven? Like, what is missing in the picture for you?
Well, first, only 1 out of 3 Americans say that what the House did was a fair process. They said they had to rush this through to remove the president from office, and yet they held the articles for 33 days. This was all done as a political stunt. Their process was completely partisan, and it was rushed, and it was sloppy. And that's what we've seen presented. It took them 4 days to do it. But to me, they did not make the case that they claim they made. And as you know, Jerry Nadler said, oh, you can find him guilty in 3 minutes. Well, I haven't come to that same conclusion.
Senator, you talked a lot about the precedent. Democrats talk a lot about the precedent being set today about the obstruction of Congress. If this was in reverse, if it was a Democratic president and Republicans were investigating them and they refused to turn over documents or witness testimony, how would that stand for you? If it was in reverse?
Go to the courts.
They had plenty of time to do that, but as members of the House have said, no, we didn't want to take the time because the president might get reelected. He's being impeached because of the possibility that he might get reelected. Adam Schiff has called into question the 2016 election and the 2020 election, and we know the focus is not just, and Chuck Schumer was just here, the focus is not just on the presidential election, it's on the Senate election as well. But the president's attorney is here, so we'll give it to him now.
Thanks, Senator. Hey, everybody. So let me say a couple things. Number one, basically, you heard their case. But you know what it really comes down to? When I just listened to Manager Jeffries at the end there, I was really trying to remove the president from the ballot in 2020. We are, 10 and a half months out from an election? And they don't trust the American people to make a decision. And there was such a state of urgency in moving this impeachment proceeding over that Nancy Pelosi sat on it for 33 days. You don't get it every way, and that's what they're trying to do. So, look, tomorrow morning, we start our case. And we're going to put on, I believe, without question, a compelling case. As I said, we have two goals. We're going to refute the allegations that they've made, and we're going to put on an affirmative case as well. All right, a few questions.
What do you think about Pat Cipollone at all going to detail his role in asking for the subpoenas not to be complied with, as well as any discussions that he may have had about Ukraine?
No, look, I'm not going to get into. He's not a witness. He's the lawyer. So that's number one. Number two, and this is important, as we've said from the outset, there are serious constitutional issues. And to ask what the lawyer's advice was to the president, I think even they would be hesitant. Although probably they would not be, because in the past they haven't been. But again, when you start talking attorney-client privilege or executive privilege at that level, I think you're running a very dangerous proceeding. Look, they put their case forward. It's our time next. Next.
What do you think about Jerry Nadler calling the president acting like a dictator?
I thought that whole he was admonished once already. I mean, so I don't get it. It's rhetoric. I'm going to assume it's Jerry Nadler rhetoric. The fact is, the Constitution of the United States governs these proceedings. Everybody wants to put that on the side. They've completed their phase of this case. They put their case forward. We will now do ours. Next.
Are you going to dossier? You said you're going to bring this up.
Well, how do you not? How do you not bring up the Steele dossier? They talked about all this foreign interference as if this is the. First of all, I'm going to bring up a couple of things tomorrow. I'm not going to. Tomorrow's really our sneak preview because we're only going for a couple of hours, obviously, the way the schedule's set up. But I'm going to tell you something. Look for things. Look for things like the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. You want to talk about foreign interference? See what the FISA court had to say about that in the last couple of weeks.
What I'm saying, is that relevant to the charges that are brought into?
Of course, they've incorporated. Yeah. No, there is no obstruction of justice. They said this, by the way, that was an interesting thing. This is worse than this one. This is worse than that one. Bill Clinton was, there was a allegation of obstruction of justice. There's no obstruction of justice here. Abuse of power, obstruction of Congress for exercise. You don't get penalized for exercising constitutional rights. Next.
Are you going to argue that there's nothing wrong with pressuring Ukraine or that he didn't do it?
Well, look, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to argue, but I would encourage you to look at what the President Zelensky said about that. Next.
What's your reaction to this news of a tape of President Trump?
I talked about that earlier. Look, it is an ambassador serves at the pleasure of the president. You know who said that? The ambassador herself.
Jay, Senator Graham says someone should do an outside investigation of Biden's and Burisma a la Robert Mueller. Does the president support that?
I haven't had any discussions on that. That the Senate, if they wanted to go there, look, for whatever reason, the House managers decided to not just open the door, but kick the door down on the Burisma Biden matter. For the life of me, I'm trying to figure out what their strategy is, but they've done it. There you go.
Wouldn't you have been talking about that anyway, had they not
not made any mention of the Bidens, though.
Well, I'm not going to tell you what I would have been talking about or not talking about, but they have certainly opened the door. I mean, look at our brief. It's not that we don't mention it, but I wouldn't say we dwell on it. They spent hours on it.
Was Rudy Giuliani's role appropriate in Ukraine?
Rudy Giuliani, I'm going to say it very clearly. Rudy Giuliani was representing a president of the United States, President Trump, who was under attack by special counsels, and to look over every possible defense is what a lawyer does.
Still
One more. Or none. So, look, the Senate asked for this accommodation. We were willing to do it, so we're going to go, I think the allocate was a 10-1 tomorrow, I think is the allocation.
So will you focus on one thing tomorrow and another?
No, I'm not going to tell you exactly what to focus on. It's going to obviously, with 3 hours, it's probably going to be a bit of an overview.
Expect to use all 24 hours?
I'm not going to make the determination on that until as our case progresses.
Would that be a smart thing to do?
I will. It may or may not be. Listen, I did an oral argument in a Supreme Court case once where my argument before the rebuttal was 8 minutes. Worked out pretty well. I think it was 9-0. So sometimes, less is more. But I will also say this. If we decide that, as our team decides that we need to go take the full time, we'll take it. If we don't, we don't. We'll make that decision as the matters progress. Remember also, after this is over, there's 2 days 16 hours of questioning. So that could technically go for a couple of days. So, thanks. All right. Thanks, everybody.
And a little preview from the president's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, about what's happening tomorrow beginning at 10 a.m. when the defense team starts their 24-hour clock. Now, each of the House managers and the president's attorneys get 24 hours spread over 3 days. Then the senators get 16 hours to ask questions, again live on C-SPAN 2. And then motions to subpoena witnesses and documents, that part gets 4 hours, and then deliberation and votes on witnesses and documents. So this will be occurring again next week. Back to Travis in Springfield, Vermont, Democrat. Travis, you are the most patient man in America, and you are now on C-SPAN 2, and hopefully we won't interrupt you again.
Oh, that's no problem, sir. I definitely I was pretty, it was actually a good thing you did listening to some of those interviews. It was pretty interesting. It seems like, I've followed this pretty much from the whole entire thing since it basically began. And it was funny listening to the Republicans at the beginning complain about how fair it was, how unfair it was. And it seems like after listening to that older woman representative from Ohio, can't remember her name, but listening to her talk about how it's just basically hearing the same stuff over and over again, it seems like... You
mean Senator Ernst of Iowa?
Yes, sir. Yes, that's exactly what I mean. I thought that the whole breakdown was the intelligence gathering, so obviously that's where they're getting this information, so that's why we were hearing that first level of stuff. And then it was the judiciary, and now it's the trial, so it seems like it'd be pretty obvious that we'd actually be hearing the same stuff. Because they were gathering the information first, everybody heard it, and now it's the trial, so of course they're going over the same stuff again. But then just listening to Representative Hakeem, kind of break it down and just say how fair everything really was, and that everyone had their chance to speak and everything. I find that really interesting.
Travis, do you think that the Democrats or the House managers have made their case?
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't really convinced when everything first started, but listening to the Intelligence Committee, just listening to the interviews, that pretty much sold me on everything. You have firsthand knowledge, people were actually involved in the situation and they knew what was going on. They knew that it wasn't right and that there was stuff that was improper, immoral, that was going on that they didn't want to be involved in. I think at that point, that's where I was sold. It's unfortunate that we obviously already know the outcome of the trial, unless by some miracle, the president's lapdogs kind of change their mind and see reason.
Will you be listening tomorrow and next week when the president's defense team takes to the stage? Absolutely.
And my prediction is I'm definitely going to be listening because it's kind of, this whole entire time, the only defense we've been hearing is basically the Republicans have just been attacking all the Democrats and the process. They haven't actually really refuted anything that's been, put up and shown. So So I'm definitely interested, but my prediction is that they're going to get up there, spend 10 minutes and be like, he's not guilty, and just end it. I mean, they don't have the votes as it is. So, I mean, that's just what I think they're going to do.
That's Travis in Springfield, Vermont. And Travis, thank you for calling in. Thank you for being patient. Donald, Republican in Lapeer, Michigan, you're on C-SPAN 2.
Yeah. As far as it goes, the House impeachment was unconstitutional. They did not allow the Republicans to present their witnesses. They wound up and even tried to block some of their witnesses from answering the Republicans' questions. They wound up and didn't let the president get on. They didn't let him have his attorneys on. I watched the whole House thing, impeachment thing, and even 4 of the Democrats even switched and went with the Republicans and said, no, he shouldn't be impeached. Now, that tells you something right there. Even 4 Democrats didn't even buy what their own party was saying. So the whole thing was a sham. If I was president, I wouldn't turn over nothing to him either, because they've been wanting this president out. This has been a foregone future thing that was going to happen, because they've mentioned about impeachment right when he was coming down the escalator. Green was talking about doing the impeachment of Donald Trump and stuff, and that they didn't give him a fair shake in the House. Now they brought the stuff over for the Senate. Now they're expecting the Senate to bend over backwards and do their job for them, and to let them call witnesses when they've already presented their case. It's up to the Senate now to turn around and do their action. And so far, what I've seen, all the Republicans are sticking together, even some that surprised me, 3 of them, matter of fact, that they said earlier that they wanted to hear witnesses, but when they went through the whole amendments deal and stuff and tried to bring witnesses in, the Republicans stayed strong.
All right, Donald in Lapeer, Michigan. Up next is Oscar, Hollis, New York, Independent Line. Oscar, we're listening.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my call. I wanted to talk about evidence and how someone might seem guilty, and I want to just kind of address everyone, all Americans, because we're all Americans. If the crime happens and the suspect is requiring other people to cover up things, cleaning the evidence, and asking for help from the police to not show the records in court, that just doesn't seem right. I don't understand how people don't see that. I know he's our president, but if our president is doing something bad, he has to be called out. We have to acknowledge that. And Republicans, you guys are Americans. It's not about the Senate doing someone else's job. It's the Senate doing the American thing for the best for America. And I just feel like a lot of people are so dug into their trenches that they're not looking at the benefit for America. They're thinking about their benefit, how they look, how their party looks. And it's really unfortunate that this is what we have to deal with. Like I said,
Oscar, thanks for calling in. Craig Kaplan, who's the Capitol Hill producer for C-SPAN, tweeted out a little bit earlier that former Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist was in the Senate Public Gallery watching the impeachment trial. The former Tennessee Republican voted guilty on both articles of impeachment in 1999 Senate trial of President Clinton. Bruce, an Indianapolis Democrat, good evening.
Yes, hi, good evening. I watched, I had an opportunity to watch 2 months worth of the Intel House as Intel committees as well as the Intelligence Committee. And now with the impeachment going forward, my only observation is, as a African American, it looks like based on the juror, Mr. Our good friend from the state of North Carolina, he said, I don't care what's going to happen. I'm going to cause it to be ended, and same with Mitch McConnell. And I feel that with a rigged system of jurors right now, they're not looking at the entire case whatsoever, especially when I listen to some of the Republican response, like the last one of the last persons who spoke. He talked about Joni Ernst bringing up issues of that aren't connected at all to the case. And the reality is Donald Trump lied about his July 25th call, and then he tried to cover it up by blocking everybody who was on the call or near the call not to testify about what really was said. And I think the best thing that the House managers did, as well as the Intelligence Committee and the Judicial Committee, was to get all of the documents together by the people who were willing to be patriotic and come forward. And I think that's the biggest issue right now for our country. Can you imagine, like one of the last callers said, what happens if you're accused of something and you turn around and say, well, I'm not going to participate in any of the proceedings. And matter of fact, I want the police to help me out, and I'm going to take care of the judge, or I'm going to take care of the prosecutor by having him not participate in my trial.
All right, Bruce, we're going to leave it there. Manu Raju of CNN tweets out, buckle in for another late evening. Senate taking a 30-minute break right now. I'm told to expect Dems to use their full time. They haven't said officially yet if they will use all their time, but that's the expectation at the moment. They have a couple more hours left in their 24-hour time clock, and a reminder that when the Senate comes back, we will join them immediately. So it might be a little bit abrupt, and we apologize in advance for that, but we want to make sure that we get every second of what's going on in the Senate. So we don't control the cameras. We don't control the time there. And James, Salem, Oregon, Republican. Hi, James.
Hi. First off, I want to talk about the Democrats keep bringing up the Constitution, and then they bring up democracy. Our founding fathers discussed democracy, and they rejected democracy at all. And I don't know when or who brought forth the Democrats to call this a democracy. It's not a democracy. It's a republic with Republican rules of law. And okay, that's one of my spiels. My
okay,
next
very
spiel,
quickly, one more spiel.
Okay, the Democrats did not vote in the House to investigate Donald Trump. Any actions against Donald Trump. So, consequently, Donald Trump says, no, you're not going to have these witnesses. So that's the point there.
All right, James in Salem, Oregon. And next is Annie, an independent in St. Paul, Minnesota. Annie, have you learned anything over the last 4 days?
Yeah, sure. I've learned lots. I've been watching this very closely for as long as it started. So what I have really learned is how thoroughly this is documented through texts of these patriots who come forward at great personal risk. Many people who lost and resigned their jobs because they knew that they would have retribution in this administration. Many people made great sacrifices to bring the truth out. And this is what I'm objecting to, the whole framing of this. This is not a sporting event with winners and losers. This is a search for truth. Now, I certainly have an idea of what truth I think is true, but I could be persuaded truly. I just want the truth. And producing the witnesses and the documents, Mr. Bolton talking, would open lots of eyes and close lots of questions. And for all those complaining Republicans that it's too long and it's repetitive, that would end it. So why don't they do that?
Senator Dick Durbin. As House managers close their presentation today, the American people are watching. The House has made a compelling case, but it won't be a full and fair trial without access to all the key documents and relevant witnesses. The American people deserve the whole truth. Next call is Mikkel in Herndon, Virginia, Democrat. Go ahead, Mikkel.
Hi, I just want to say, first off, thank you so much for your coverage. I've been able to follow it through both your site and the assistance of multiple streamers such as Sean Hutchinson and AKA Hutch, who's been doing a fantastic job in terms of making this more accessible to viewers with live fact-checking. So for my point, I just want to preface this by saying I'm a first-generation American, and 2016 was the first election I was able to vote in. So watching all of these proceedings from the beginning has been very enlightening and very key in terms of understanding where essentially we're at as a country. Because realistically, what we're looking at is a fight for whether or not we still think truth is important, whether or not we still think us as a nation value truth or value facts. Because when you have the opposition's points, who they repeat conspiracy theories, they repeat just like sound bites for their base, and they don't have any substantive defense for the actions, it sends a message to the people like me, whose my parents fought to get to this country because we believed that there was something here. We fought and we believed that there was something here that was beautiful, that was different. And historically, this is an ugly time. And right now, realistically, throughout all of this, I really just want to think about the historical context of what everyone's actions are saying. Because history is going to continue. Every single senator, every single rep on the floor is going to have this go down in history. Because we need to know as people, as citizens, that the representatives work for us, and we need to make sure that whatever votes that we cast are votes placed in favor of truth and reality and things that are aligned with the soul of our nation.
And in fact, Beth in Baltimore, Maryland says that party affiliation in the impeachment of President Trump should not be an issue. We are all Americans. We must hold him to a standard that respects our laws and our Constitution. Senator Marsha Blackburn tweeted out that to consider the impeachment scam a failed sales pitch. It's time to get back to fighting for what Tennesseans want from Washington: better trade, a secure border, and tax cuts. Brian in Lake Station, Indiana, Republican. Very quickly, what do you want to say?
How are you? I'm a staunch constitutionalist, originalist. I align most closely with the Republicans. As much as it's hurt me to do so, I have listened to every single word that I possibly could while I wasn't in the process of working. Every word that the Democrats have said. They failed flat on their face to convince me.
Give an example of how they failed in your view.
Everything was absolutely repetitive. It was the same thing over and over and over and again. We've heard it for three and a half years now, almost. The same thing since day one. 19 minutes after he was elected president, the Washington Post came out or the New York Times came out with a hit piece. The campaign to impeach the president has begun. They've just gone after him over and over and over and over again. I'm going to listen to every single word the president's lawyers say, and I'm going to see if they get the witnesses, and I'm going to listen to all of it. Maybe something can still change my mind. The president is not God. If the president broke the law, as much as I like him, as much as I like what he's done for the country, and as much as I like what he's done for my paycheck, he's not above the law. If he broke the law, he needs to pay the price.
And the president's lawyers will begin their presentation tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Of course, that'll be live on C-SPAN 2. Senator Angus King, an independent from Maine, tweeted this out earlier. Over the course of these impeachment proceedings, I'm drafting questions that I will ask to the House managers and White House lawyers in the days ahead in order to help us get to the truth. I've got some ideas of my own, but want to hear from Maine people. Any suggestions? And that's what he tweeted out. And again, the president's lawyers have 24 hours. The senators then have 16 hours. And then it's 4 hours deliberation on whether or not more witnesses and testimony is needed. Norman, Olympia, Washington, Independent Line. Hi.
Hello, how are you?
Please go ahead.
I have three items. I don't know how much importance they are, but I am an independent. I voted for Ross Perot, and I worked for Wendell Willkie in 1940 So that kind of classifies me as independent. I don't like Democrats calling in and claiming to be Republicans, and Republicans calling and claiming to be Democrats. An independent is an independent. Anyhow, the sense of the House, as far as the impeachment inquiry goes, was never expressed. There was no vote on that. There was simply a proclamation by the Speaker that there would be a impeachment inquiry. I'm sure that will be decided in the future by the Supreme Court, and I'm sure it'll be brought up tomorrow. Number two, has anyone seriously given any thought to what our republic would be like if President Trump was removed from the White House and was not allowed to run for the presidency in this November? My gosh, you would have 63 million people in an uproar.
Would you be one of those 63 million, Norman?
I'm too old. I'm too old for that stuff. But I would be quite upset if that was to happen, because it is not the sense of the people. You can't remove a person from the White House on a partisan, party line House of Representatives.
Did you say that you were a volunteer for Wendell Willkie in 1940?
That's correct. Yeah, I passed out buttons.
How old were you at the time?
Carlinville, Illinois.
How old were you?
95, pretty quick. But the other thing I wanted to point out to you, and this is really important, in your picture, you have the Capitol dome in the background.
Yes, sir. Norman, you there?
Generally, they blow in the same direction, but very occasionally, they will blow in opposite directions. I don't understand how this is working, but it defines the House and the Senate as far as differences of opinion and the wind blowing which direction.
All right, Norman, thank you for calling in. And by the way, that's the actual Capitol Dome back there. It's not a TV-generated thing. It sits right just a couple blocks north of where we are here. Jeff from Indiana texts in. As I said from day one and now, I consider myself a Republican, but as I have seen everything thus far, I believe both sides. I believe the president did as the Democrats stated, and I believe Trump will be acquitted, and I will vote for him in the upcoming 2020 election. The first vote taken will be the same as the last. This might be the sentiment of most Americans, unfortunately. And you can see Majority Leader McConnell working his way back to the floor. So the Senate will be coming in momentarily. Bo, Lock Haven, Pennsylvania, Democrat. Let's hear what you have to say.
Hey, good evening. I want to say that, first of all, there's a lot of misconceptions here about, what the House committees and so forth related to their role, and also the Senate, what their role is. Obviously, if you look at it, the House, their committees and so forth would basically be looked at least in a criminal standpoint, almost as like the grand jury. So that's the rules that we would expect to be seen there. And then the Senate, they ultimately are the jury. They've been called. They've been, sworn an oath to maintain impartiality and so forth. But we'll see where that goes.
Roberta, Paso Robles, California, Republican. Very quickly, Roberta.
Hi, I was just calling in to say I am just sad and scared for our country. I'm a Republican, but both sides to me are just disgraceful, both sides. We are a divided country straight down the middle. I don't believe that any Republicans are going to believe what the Democrats say. I don't believe the Democrats are going to say what the Republicans say. At the end of the day, everyone's going to be exactly where they were before, however it comes down. If he's acquitted, the Democrats will go crazy and we'll have riots and stuff again. If he's not, it'll go the other way. And it's just really sad. You can't see Congress coming together at all like they used to. I'm older too, but people used to get together. You could go across the aisle. You could get some stuff done. It just doesn't happen anymore. It's just everything's centered on, I want to keep my power in Congress. I am definitely for term limits because they get in there and they just want to keep the power. It doesn't matter either side what's happening.
What's it like to be a Republican in California?
Pardon?
What's it like to be a Republican in California these days?
A lot of fun. No. Yeah, it's hard. It's very hard, and I'm a teacher too, so that's even harder. I'm in a little pocket where we're probably more conservative here than the rest of California. But I just see it's really sad to see us so divided. We're just so divided. I don't think anyone's going to believe anybody.
Thank you for calling in. We're going to try to get Sam in Kingsville, Missouri, in here. Independent line. Go ahead, Sam.
Hi, and thank you for taking my call. I think that the biggest thing for me is I am just so tired of the hypocrisy that I am witnessing. For example, they're making such a big deal out of the foreign interference in our elections, which is a big deal, absolutely. But why then aren't we discussing the motor voter laws that are passed in California and New York, where foreigners here illegally are getting a voter registration card along with their driver's license?
So what have you learned from this impeachment process, Sam?
Well, I do not feel that they have proven their case. I think that it has been based on assumption and personal opinion, and that there has been no hard evidence. It has really opened my eyes to a lot of things. I feel like there is a big attack on our Constitution right now, not only in a partisan attempt to try to remove a president, but we have an attack on our gun laws. We have an attack on our freedom of speech, an attack on our elections. And unfortunately, these attacks all seem to be stemming from Democratic-run areas.
Bob, Ventura, California, Democrat. Go ahead, Bob.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to thank you for taking my call, but I just wanted to point out that we're appealing. Unfortunately, the Republicans regrettably seem to be appealing to everyone's belief system. And that's a different set of axioms. It just matters of whether or not you truly believe something. It doesn't matter what that belief is. So you're appealing to a vast audience, whereas the Democratic arguments are based on logic and and trying to prove something in a logical fashion. And they've done an excellent job, but it's not going to play with somebody's dealing with a different axiomatic basis for their thoughts, and if your basis is what you believe, then it doesn't matter what's presented logically. So they're appealing to that outcome, I feel.
Bob, we asked Denise from Paso Robles a few minutes ago what it was like to be a Republican in California. What's it like to be a Democrat in California these days?
I think if you're not frustrated, then you're not paying attention.
That's Bob in Ventura. This is Denise in Florida. Text, Trump is our last hope, and nothing I'm hearing from the liars on the Senate floor will change that. Joey, Concord, Virginia, Republican. You're on C-SPAN 2. Go ahead.
Yes, I just like to thanks for letting me call in. I'd like to say that I watched this proceeding in the House.
And the Senate is back. Final hours.
Majority Leader is recognized. I've spoken with Congressman Schiff and his team, and it looks like we've got a couple more hours.
Okay.
Mr. Chief Justice, members of the Senate, counsel for the President, impeachment exists not to inflict personal punishment for past wrongdoing, but rather to protect against future presidential misconduct that would endanger democracy and the rule of law. President Trump remains a threat in at least three fundamental ways. First, he continues to assert in court and elsewhere that nobody in the U.S. government can investigate him for wrongdoing, making him unaccountable. Second, his conduct here is not a one-off. It's a pattern of soliciting foreign interference in our elections to his own advantage, and then using the powers of his office to stop anyone who dares investigate. Finally, the president's obstruction is very much a constitutional crime in progress, harming Congress as it deliberates these very proceedings and the American people who deserve to know the facts. A president who believes he can get away with anything and can use his office to conceal evidence of abuse threatens us all. President Trump is the first president in U.S. history to say he is immune from any effort to examine his conduct or check his power. He claims he is completely immune from criminal indictment and prosecution while serving as president. He claims he could commit any crime, even shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, as he has joked about, with impunity. And the president's own lawyers have argued in court that he cannot even be investigated for violating the law under any circumstance. Now, no president of either party has ever made claims like this. And if an investigation somehow does uncover misconduct by the president, as this investigation has done, the president believes that he can simply quash it. He claims the right to end federal law enforcement investigations for any reason or none at all, even when there is credible evidence of his own wrongdoing. Added together, the president's positions amount to a license to do anything he wants. No court has ever accepted this view, and for good reason. Our founders created a system in which all people, even presidents, are bound by the law and accountable for their actions. In addition to claiming that he is immune from criminal process, President Trump contends that he is not accountable to either Congress or the judiciary. He has invoked bizarre legal theories to justify defying congressional investigations. He has argued that Congress is forbidden from having the courts intervene with executive branch officials disregarding its subpoenas. He has sued to block third parties from complying with congressional subpoenas. And perhaps most remarkably, President Trump has claimed that Congress cannot investigate his misconduct outside of an impeachment inquiry, while simultaneously claiming that Congress cannot investigate his misconduct in an impeachment inquiry. Of course, President Trump considers any inquiry to be illegitimate if he thinks he did nothing wrong, doubts the motives of Congress, or decides that he would prefer a different set of rules. Let's review the president's position. He can't be investigated for crimes. He can end any federal law enforcement investigation into him. He is immune from any state law enforcement investigation. Neither he nor his aides can be subpoenaed. He can reject subpoenas based on broad, novel, and even rejected theories. And when he does reject subpoenas, Congress is not allowed to sue him. But he is allowed to sue to block others from complying with congressional subpoenas. Congress definitely can't investigate him outside of an impeachment inquiry. And again, it can't investigate him as part of one. The bottom line is that the president truly believes that he is above the law. This is not our system, and it never has been. The president is a constitutional officer. Unlike a king, he is accountable to the Constitution. But this president doesn't believe that, and that's why we are here. Remember, the precedent that you set in this trial will shape American democracy for the future. It will govern this president, and it will govern those who follow. If you let the president get away with his obstruction, you risk grave and irreparable harm to the separation of powers itself. Representative Lawrence Hogan, a Republican from Maryland, made this point during the Nixon impeachment hearings.
The historical precedent we're setting here is so great because in every future impeachment of a president, it is inconceivable that the evidence relating to that impeachment will not be in the hands of the executive branch, which is under his controls. So I agree with the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Seiberling. If we do not pass this article today, the whole impeachment power becomes meaningless.
This leads us to a second consideration: the president's pattern of obstructing. Article 2 describes President Trump's impeachable conduct in obstructing Congress. On its own, that warrants removal from office. Yet it must be noted that the president's obstruction fits a disturbing pattern. As stated in Article 2, President Trump's obstruction is, quote, consistent with his previous efforts to undermine United States government investigations into foreign interference in United States elections. Another example is President Trump's attempts to impede the special counsel's investigation into Russian interference with the 2016 election, as well as the president's sustained efforts to obstruct the special counsel after learning that he was under investigation for obstruction of justice. The special counsel's investigation addressed an issue of extraordinary importance to our national security and democracy: the integrity of our elections themselves. Rather than aid the special counsel's investigation, however, President Trump sought to thwart it and used the powers of his office to do it. After learning that he himself was under investigation, President Trump ordered the firing of the special counsel, sought to curtail the special counsel's investigation, instructed the White House counsel to create a false record and make false public statements, and tampered with at least 2 key witnesses in the investigation. The pattern is as unmistakable as it is unnerving. In one moment, President Trump welcomed and invited a foreign nation to interfere in an election to his advantage. In the next, he solicited and pressured a foreign nation to do so. In one moment, President Trump used the powers of his office to obstruct the special counsel. And the next, he used the powers of his office to obstruct the House impeachment inquiry. In one moment, the president stated that he remained free to invite foreign interference in our elections. And the next, he in fact invited additional foreign interference in our elections.
And by the way, likewise, China should start an investigation into the Bidens.
Indeed, President Trump placed his fateful July 25th call to President Zelensky just one day after the special counsel testified in Congress about his findings. As Professor Gerhardt testified before the Judiciary Committee, quote, "The power to impeach includes the power to investigate. But if the president can stymie this House's impeachment inquiry, he can eliminate the impeachment power as a means for holding him and future presidents accountable for serious misconduct. If left unchecked, the president will likely continue his pattern of soliciting foreign interference on his behalf in the next election." Now, I must emphasize that President Trump's obstruction persists to this day. The second article of impeachment charges a high crime in progress. As a result, the president's wrongdoing did not just harm the House as we have performed our own constitutional duty. It is also harming the Senate, which is being deprived of information you need before the votes you will soon take. And of course, the true victim is the American people, who deserve the full truth. As we've discussed, the president's claims that all the evidence he is hiding and covering up would actually prove his innocence. To borrow a phrase from the late Justice Scalia, that claim, quote, taxes the credulity of the credulous. President Trump has used all the authority of his office to block the full truth from coming to light. He has defied subpoenas and ordered others to do so. He has publicly intimidated and threatened witnesses. He has attacked the House for daring to investigate him. And he has lobbed an endless volley of personal attacks on witnesses and meritless complaints about procedure to sow confusion and distract the American people. The president's abuses are unfolding before our eyes, and they must be stopped. Now, before I conclude, I think you all deserve an explanation from me as to why I am standing here. There's been a lot of conversation the last few years about what makes America great. And I have some ideas about that. I happen to think that what makes America great is that generation after generation, there have been Americans that have been willing to stand up and put aside their self-interest to make great sacrifices for the public good, for our country. I know because I have seen people do that. Like some of the people in this chamber, I have seen people give everything for this country so we could sit here today. Now, this isn't politically expedient. It certainly isn't for me. It's hard. It requires sacrifice. It's uncomfortable. But that is the very definition of public service. That we are here to give of ourselves for the country, for others, at sacrifice to ourselves. Those who have given so much for this country deserve nothing less from us now than to try to honor those sacrifices. I have tried to do that the last few days. My time is done, and it is now your turn.
Chief Justice, Senators, learned counsel for the President, you'll be pleased to know this is the last presentation of the evening. And as I started last night, I made reference to some good advice I got from an encouraging voice that said, keep it up, but not too long. Tonight, I got some equally good advice. To be immortal, you don't need to be eternal. And I will do my best not to be eternal. First point I'd like to make is I'm tired. I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted. And I can only imagine how you feel. But I'm also very deeply grateful for just how you have attended to these presentations and discussions over the last few days. I'm deeply grateful. I can tell how much consideration you have given to our point of view and the President's point of view, and that's all we can ask. At the end of the day, all we can ask is that you hear us out and make the best judgment that you can, consistent with your conscience and our Constitution. Now, I wanted to start out tonight with where we began when we first appeared before you about a week ago, and that is with the resolution itself, with what the President is charged with in the articles and how that holds up now that you have heard the evidence from the House. Donald Trump was impeached in Article 1 for abuse of power. And that article provides that in his conduct of the office of President of the United States and in violation of his constitutional oath faithfully to execute the office a President of the United States, and to the best of his ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and is in violation of his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, Donald J. Trump has abused the powers of his presidency in that, using the powers of his high office, President Trump solicited the interference of a foreign government, Ukraine, in the 2020 United States presidential election. President Trump solicited the interference of a foreign government, Ukraine, in the 2020 election. That has been proved. He did so through a scheme or course of conduct that included soliciting the government of Ukraine to publicly announce investigations that would benefit his reelection, harm the election prospects of a political opponent, and influence the 2020 U.S. presidential election to his advantage. That has been proved. President Trump also sought to pressure the government of Ukraine to take these steps by conditioning official U.S. government acts of significant value to Ukraine on its public announcement of the investigations. That has been proved. President Trump engaged in the scheme or course of conduct for corrupt purposes in pursuit of personal political benefit. That has been proved. In doing so, President Trump used the power of the presidency in a manner that compromised the national security of the United States and undermined the integrity of the United States democratic process. That has been proved. He thus ignored and injured the interests of the nation. That has been proved. President Trump engaged in this scheme or course of conduct through the following means. President Trump, acting both directly and through his agents within and outside the United States government, corruptly solicited the government of Ukraine to publicly announce investigations into a political opponent, former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. That has been proved. A discredited theory promoted by Russia alleging that Ukraine, rather than Russia, interfered in the 2016 United States presidential election. That has been proved. With the same corrupt motives, President Trump, acting both directly and through his agents within and outside the U.S. government, conditioned two official acts on the public announcements that he had requested: the release of $391 million of U.S. taxpayer funds that Congress had appropriated on a bipartisan basis for the purpose of providing vital military and security assistance to Ukraine to oppose Russian aggression, and which President Trump had ordered suspended. That has been proved. And B, a head of state meeting at the White House, which the President of Ukraine sought to demonstrate continued United States support for the government of Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression. That has been proved. Faced with public revelation of his actions, President Trump ultimately released the military and security assistance to the government of Ukraine, but has persisted in openly and corruptly urging and soliciting Ukraine to undertake investigations for his personal political benefit. That has been proved. These actions were consistent with President Trump's previous invitations of foreign interference in U.S. elections. That has been proved. In all of this, President Trump abused the powers of the presidency by ignoring and injuring national security and other vital national interests to obtain an improper personal political benefit. That has been proved. He also betrayed the nation by abusing his high office to enlist a foreign power in corrupting democratic elections. That has been proved. Wherefore, President Trump, by such conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to national security and the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with self-governance and the rule of law. That has been proved. President Trump thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. That will be for you to decide. But the facts have been proved. Those facts are not contested. We have met our burden. Article 2, obstruction of Congress. The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment, and the President shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. In his conduct of the office of the President, in violation of his constitutional oath, faithfully to execute the office of President of the United States, and to the best of his ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, Donald J. Trump has directed the unprecedented, categorical, and indiscriminate defiance of subpoenas issued by the House of Representatives pursuant to its sole power of impeachment. That has been proved. President Trump has abused the powers of the presidency in a manner offensive to and subversive of the Constitution, in that the House of Representatives has engaged in an impeachment inquiry focused on President Trump's corrupt solicitation of the government of Ukraine to interfere in the 2020 U.S. presidential election. That has been proved. As part of this impeachment inquiry, the committees undertaking the investigation served subpoenas, seeking documents and testimony deemed vital to the inquiry from various executive branch agencies and offices and current and former officials. That has been proved. In response, without lawful cause or excuse, President Trump directed executive branch agencies, offices, and officials not to comply with those subpoenas. That has been proved. President Trump thus interposed the powers of the presidency against the lawful subpoenas of the House of Representatives and assumed to himself functions and judgments necessary to exercise the sole power of impeachment vested in the Constitution in the House of Representatives. That has been proved. President Trump abused the powers of his high office through the following means. Number one, directing the White House to defy a lawful subpoena by withholding the production of documents sought therein by the committees. That has been proved. Directing other executive branch agencies and offices to defy lawful subpoenas and withhold the production of documents and records from the committees, in response to which the Department of State, the Office of Management Budget, Department of Energy, and Department of Defense refused to produce a single record or document. That has been proved. Directing current and former executive branch officials not to cooperate with the committees, in response to which 9 administration officials defied subpoenas for testimony, namely John Michael McMulvaney, Robert B. Blair, John A. Eisenberg, Michael Ellis, Preston Wells Griffith, Russell T. Vaught, Michael Duffy, Brian McCormick, and T. Ulrich Brechbuhl. That has been proved. These actions were consistent with President Trump's previous efforts to undermine United States government investigations into foreign interference in U.S. elections. That has been proved. Through these actions, President Trump sought to arrogate to himself the right to determine the propriety, scope, and nature of an impeachment inquiry into his own conduct, as well as the unilateral prerogative to deny any and all information to the House of Representatives in the exercise of its sole power of impeachment. That has been proved. In the history of the Republic, no president has ever ordered the complete defiance of an impeachment inquiry or sought to obstruct and impede so comprehensively the ability of the House of Representatives to investigate high crimes and misdemeanors. That has been proved. The abuse of office served to cover up the president's own repeated misconduct and to seize and control the power of impeachment and thus to nullify a vital safeguard vested solely in the House of Representatives. That has been proved. In all of this, President Trump has acted in a manner contrary to his trust as president and subversive of constitutional government, to the great prejudice of the cause of law and justice, and to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. That has been proved. Whereas, or wherefore, President Trump, by such conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with self-government and the rule of law. That has been proved. President Trump thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. That will be for you to determine. Let me say something about this second article. The facts of the president's defiance of Congress are very simple. Because they were so uniform, because they were so categorical, because they are so uncontested. But do not mistake for a moment the fact that it was simple and quick to present that course of conduct compared with a sophisticated campaign to coerce Ukraine into thinking that that second article is any less significant than the first. Do not believe that for a moment. If there is no Article 2, let me tell you something. There will never be an Article 1. If there's no Article 2, there will never, of any kind or shape or form, be an Article 1. And why is that? Because if you and we lack the power to investigate a president, there will never be an Article 1. Whether that Article 1 is abuse of power, or that Article 1 is treason, or that Article 1 is bribery, there will never be an Article 1 if the Congress can't investigate an impeachable offense. If the Congress cannot, because the president prevents it, investigate the president's own wrongdoing, there will never be an Article 1. Because there will be no more impeachment power. It will be gone. It will be gone. As I said before, our relationship with Ukraine will survive. God willing, our relationship with Ukraine will survive, and Ukraine will prosper, and we will get beyond this ugly chapter of our history. But if we are to decide here that a president of the United States can simply say, under Article 2, I can do whatever I want, and I don't have to treat a co-equal branch of government like it exists. I don't have to give it any more than the back of my hand. That will be an unending injury to this country. Ukraine will survive, and so will we, but that will be an unending injury to this country, because the balance of power that our founders set out will never be the same. Will never be the same. If a president can simply say, I'm going to fight all subpoenas. And I'll tell you something else. Truism in the courts is just as true here in the Senate, where they say justice delayed is justice denied. You give this president or any other the unilateral power to delay as long as he or she likes, to litigate matters for years and years in the courts, and do not fool yourself into thinking it is anything less. In April, it'll be a year since we subpoenaed Don McGahn, and there is no sign of an end to that case. And I'll tell you, when it gets to the Supreme Court, you might think that's the end, and that's just the end of the first chapter. Because Don McGahn is in court saying, I'm absolutely immune from testimony. Now, that's been rejected by every court that's looked at it. But we'll see what the Court of Appeals says, and then we'll see if it goes to an en banc Court of Appeals, and then we'll see what the Supreme Court says. And when we prevail in the Supreme Court, you know what happens? That's not the end of the matter. It comes back to the trial court, and then, well, they can't claim absolute immunity anymore. They can't claim that we don't even have to bother showing up. So now we're going to turn to Plan B, executive privilege. We're going to say we can't and won't answer any of the questions that are really pertinent to your impeachment inquiry, and let's start out in district court, and then go to the Court of Appeals, and then go en banc, and then go to the Supreme Court. You can game the system for years. Justice delayed is justice denied, and so is true about presidential accountability. So when you suggest, or I suggest, or anyone suggests, or the White House suggests, why doesn't the Congress, why didn't the House just exhaust their remedies? As if in the Constitution where it says the House shall have the sole power of impeachment, there's an asterisk that says, after exhausting all court remedies, and first seeking court in the district court, and then seeking relief in the Court of Appeals, and after that going to the Supreme Court. Let's not kid ourselves about what that really means. What that really means is you allow the president to control the timing of his own impeachment, or if it will ever be permitted to come before this body. That is not an impeachment power, that is the absence of an impeachment power. Article 2 is every bit as important as Article 1. Without Article 2, there is no Article 1 ever again, no matter how egregious this president's conduct or any other. It is fundamental to the separation of powers. If you can't have the ability to enforce an impeachment power, you might as well not put it in the Constitution. Now, shortly, the president's lawyers will have a chance to make their presentation. And as we will not have the ability to respond to what they say, I want to give you a little preview of what I think they're going to have in store for you, so that when you do hear it, you can put it into some perspective. I expect that they will attack the process. I don't think that's any mystery. But I want to tell you both what I expect they will share with you and what it really means. When you cut through all the chaff, what does it really mean that they're saying? So here's what I expect that they will tell you. The process was so unfair. It was the most unfair in the history of the world. Because in the House, they took depositions. How dare they take depositions? How dare they listen to Trey Gowdy? How dare they follow the Republican procedures that preceded their investigation? How dare they? And they were so secret in the bunker in the basement, as if whether it's on the ground floor or the basement or the first floor makes any difference. Those super secret depositions in which only 100 members of Congress, equivalent to the entire Senate, could participate. That's how secret they were. That's how exclusive they were. Every Democrat, every Republican on 3 committees could participate. Of course, that wasn't enough, so you had even more storm the skiff, right? So you have 100 people can participate, but you heard earlier, but the Republicans weren't allowed to participate. Okay, that's just false. You know how we did it in those super secret depositions? And you can look this up yourself because we released the transcripts. We got an hour, they got an hour. We got 45 minutes, they got 45 minutes. And we did that back and forth until everyone was done asking their questions. Now you'll hear, oh, Chairman Schiff was so unfair, he wouldn't allow us to ask our questions. Well, there were certain questions I didn't allow. Questions like, who's the whistleblower? Because we want to punish that whistleblower. Because yes, some of us in this House and in this House believe we ought to protect whistleblowers. So yes, I did not allow the outing of the whistleblower. So when they say the chairman wouldn't allow certain questions, that's what they mean. That means that we protect people who have the courage to come forward and blow the whistle. That we don't think, though the president might, that they're traitors and spies. To believe that someone who blows the whistle on misconduct of the serious nature that you now know took place is a traitor or spy, there is only one way you can come to that conclusion. And that is if you believe you are the state, and that anything that contradicts you is treason. That is the only way that you can conceive of someone who exposes wrongdoing is a traitor or a spy. But that is exactly how this president views those who expose his wrongdoing, because he is the state. Like any good monarch, he is the state. And you'll hear the president wasn't allowed to participate in the Judiciary Committee. Well, that's false too, as you've heard. The president had the same rights in our proceedings as President Nixon and President Clinton. But nonetheless, you'll hear it was so unfair. And one other thing that was really unfair is all the subpoenas were invalid because the House didn't pass a resolution announcing its impeachment inquiry. Never mind that we actually did. The problem was, they said, well, we hadn't, and then we did, and then the problem was, well, you did. Now, of course, as you know, the Constitution says the House will have the sole power of impeachment. If we want to do it by House resolution, we can do it by House resolution. If we want to do it by committee, we can do it by committee. It is not the president's place to tell us how to conduct an impeachment proceeding any more than it is the president's place to tell you how you should try it. So when you see that 8-page diatribe from the White House counsel saying, we should have been able to have a resolution in the House, or we should have been able to have this, what you should hear, what they really mean is Donald Trump had the right to control his own impeachment proceeding. And it's an outrage that Donald Trump didn't get to write the rules of his own impeachment proceeding in the House. You give a president that right, there is no impeachment power. But when you hear them say that, when you hear them complain about depositions that were the same as the Republicans, or the right to participate that was the same in Clinton and Nixon, and by the way, they weren't allowed to call witnesses, they said. Well, 3 of the 12 witnesses that we heard in our open hearings were the minority witness requests. So you'll hear those arguments, the most unfair in history. The fact is, we had the same process. In those other impeachments, the majority did not surrender its subpoena power to the minority. You know what it did? It said, you can subpoena witnesses, and if the majority doesn't agree, you can force a vote. That is the same process we had here. The majority does not surrender its subpoena power. Didn't in the prior impeachments, didn't in this one. When they say the process was unfair, what they really mean is, don't look at what the president did. For God's sake, don't look at what the president did. Now, you'll also hear, I think the second thing you'll hear from the president's team is attack the managers. Those managers are just awful. They're terrible people, especially that Schiff guy. He's the worst. He's the worst. And Exhibit A, he mocked the president. He mocked the president. He mocked the president as if he was shaking down the leader of another country, like he was an organized crime figure. He mocked the president. He said, it was like the president said, listen, Zelensky, because I'm only going to say this 7 times. Well, I discovered something very significant by mocking the president. And that is, for a man who loves to mock others, he does not like to be mocked. As it turns out, he's got a pretty thin skin. Who would have thought it? Never mind that I said I wasn't using his words before I said it, and I wasn't using his words after I said it, and I said I was making a parody of his words. It's an outrage. He mocked the president. That Schiff. Terrible. Now, they will attack my other colleagues too for things said in the heat of debate here on the floor as we're reaching the wee hours of the morning. And they'll attack some of my colleagues who aren't even in this chamber. Maybe they'll attack the squad. That's a perennial favorite with the president. If they attack the squad, you should ask, what does that have to do with the price of beans? But you can expect attacks on all kinds of members of the House that have nothing to do with the issues before you. And when you hear those attacks, you should ask yourself, away from what do they want to distract my attention? because 9 times out of 10, it will be the president's misconduct. But look for it. Attacks on the managers, attacks on other House members, attacks on the Speaker, attacks on who knows what. It's all of the same ilk. Whatever you do, just don't consider the president's misconduct. You'll also hear attacks on the Constitution. Of course, it won't be framed as an attack on the Constitution, but that's really what it represents. And that is, abuse of power doesn't violate the Constitution. Presidents of the United States have every right to abuse their power. That's the argument. Okay, I know it's a hard argument to make, right? Presidents have a constitutional right to abuse their power. And how dare the House of Representatives charge a president with abusing his power? Now, I'm looking forward to that constitutional argument by Alan Dershowitz. Because I want to know why abusing power and trust is not impeachable now, but it was a few years ago. Because the last time I checked, I don't think there was a significant change to the Constitution between the time he said it was impeachable and the time he's saying now that apparently it is not impeachable. So I'm looking forward to that argument. But I'm also looking forward to Ken Starr's presentation. Because during the Clinton impeachment, he maintained that a president not only could, but must be impeached for obstructing justice. That Bill Clinton needed to be impeached because he lied under oath about sex. And to do so obstructed justice. You can be impeached for obstructing justice, but you cannot be impeached for obstructing Congress. Now, I have to confess, I don't know exactly how that's supposed to work. Because the logical conclusion from that is Ken Starr saying that Bill Clinton's mistake was in showing up under subpoena. That Bill Clinton's mistake was in not saying, I'm going to fight all subpoenas. That Bill Clinton's mistake was in not taking the position that under Article 2 he could do whatever he wanted. Does that really make any sense? You can be impeached for obstructing your own branch of government, but you cannot be impeached for obstructing a co-equal branch of government. That would make no sense to the framers. I have to think over the centuries as they've watched us, they would be astonished that anyone would take that argument seriously or could so misapprehend how this balance of power is supposed to work. So I look forward to that argument. And maybe when they make that argument, they can explain to us why their position on abuse of power isn't even supported by their own Attorney General. So I hope they will answer why even their own Attorney General doesn't agree with them. Not to mention, by the way, the constitutional law expert called by the Republicans in the House, who also testified as to abuse of power that it is impeachable, that you don't need a crime that's impeachable. Now, when you hear them make these arguments, cannot be impeached for abusing your power, this is what it really means. We cannot defend his conduct. And so we want to make it go all the way without even having to think about that. You don't even need to think about what the president did because the House charged it wrong. And so don't even consider what the president did. That's what that argument means. We can't defend the indefensible, so we have to fall back on even if he abused his office, even if he did all the things he's accused of, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing that can be done about it. Now, you'll also hear, as part of the defense, and you heard this from Jay Sekulow, was I think the last thing he said, the whistleblower. And then he stepped back to the table. The whistleblower. Now, I don't really know what that meant, but I suspect you'll hear more of that. The whistleblower. The whistleblower. It's his or her fault that we're here. The whistleblower. You know, I would encourage you to read the whistleblower complaint again. When you read that complaint again, you will see just how remarkably accurate it is. It's astonishingly accurate. You know, for all the times the president is out there saying that the complaint was all wrong, you read it. Now that you have heard the evidence, you read it, and you will see how remarkably right the whistleblower got it. Now, when that complaint was filed, it's obviously before we had our depositions and had our hearings, all of which obviated the need for the whistleblower. In the beginning, we wanted the whistleblower to come and testify because all we knew about was the complaint. But then we were able to hear from firsthand witnesses about what happened. And then something else happened. The president and his allies began threatening the whistleblower. And the life of the whistleblower was at risk. And what was the point in exposing that whistleblower to the risk of his or her life when we had the evidence we needed? What was the point? Except retribution. Retribution, and the president wants it still. You know why the president is mad at the whistleblower? Because but for the whistleblower, he wouldn't have been caught. And that is an unforgivable sin. He is the state. And but for the whistleblower, the president wouldn't have been caught. For that, he's a spy and he's guilty of treason. Now, what does he add to this? Nothing but retribution, a pound of flesh. You'll also hear the president's defense. They hate the president. They hate the president. You should not consider the president's misconduct because they hate the president. Now, what I've said, I leave you to your own judgments about the president. I only hate what he's done to this country. I grieve for what he's done to this country. But when they make the argument to you that this is only happening because they hate the president, it is just another of the myriad forms of please do not consider what the president did. Whether you like the president or you dislike the president is immaterial. It's all about the Constitution and his misconduct. If it meets the standard of impeachable conduct as we have proved, it doesn't matter whether you like him. It doesn't matter whether you dislike him. What matters is whether he is a danger to the country because he will do it again. And none of us can have confidence based on his record that he will not do it again because he is telling us every day that he will. Now you'll hear the further defense that Biden is corrupt, that Joe Biden is corrupt, that Hunter Biden is corrupt. This is their defense. This will be another defense. Because what they hope to achieve in the Senate trial is what they couldn't achieve through their scheme. If they couldn't get Ukraine to smear the Bidens, they want to use this trial to do it instead. So let's call Hunter Biden. Let's smear the Bidens. Let's succeed in the trial with what we couldn't do with this scheme. That's the goal. Now, I don't know whether Rudy Giuliani, who said he was going to present his report to some of the senators, has presented his report. Maybe he has. Maybe you'll get to see what's in Rudy Giuliani's report. Maybe you'll get to see some documents smearing the Bidens produced by who knows? Maybe the same Russian corrupt former prosecutors. But make no mistake about what that's about. It's about completing the object of the scheme through other means, through the means of this trial. You may hear the argument that what the president is doing when he is obstructing Congress is protecting the office for future presidents. Because there is nothing more important to Donald Trump than protecting the office of the presidency for future presidents. And I suppose when he withheld military aid from Ukraine, he was trying to protect future presidents. And when he sought to coerce a foreign power to intervene in our election, he was doing it on behalf of future presidents, because future presidents might likewise wish to cheat in a further election. I don't think that argument goes very far. But I expect you'll hear it. I expect you'll hear it. You may hear an argument that the president was really concerned about corruption, and he was concerned about burden sharing. I won't spend much time on that because you've heard the evidence on that. There is no indication that this had anything to do with corruption, and every bit of evidence that it had nothing to do with fighting corruption or burden sharing. Indeed, nothing about the burden changed between the time he froze the aid and the time he released the aid. There was no new effort to get others to contribute more, and Europe contributes a great deal as it is. This is an after-the-fact rationalization. You probably saw the public reporting that there was an exhaustive effort after the fact to come up with a post hoc rationalization for this scheme. I would like to show you the product of that investigation, but I'll need your help because it is among the documents they refuse to turn over. They will show you just what an after-the-fact invention this argument is. Now, I expect you'll hear the argument, Obama did it. Obama did it. Now, that may take several different forms, but the form of Obama did it that I'm referring to is Obama also withheld aid. Honestly, I think that argument is an insult to our intelligence, because the argument is Obama withheld aid from Egypt, and he made a condition with it. Obama withheld aid from Egypt after they had a revolution, and circumstances changed. And you know something? He didn't hide it from Congress. In fact, Congress supported it. And yes, there are times when we withhold aid for a good policy reason, not a corrupt effort to get help in your election. The American people know the difference between right and wrong. They can recognize the difference between aid that is withheld for a malicious purpose and aid that is held in the best interests of our national security. But you'll hear the Obama did it argument. You will hear the call was perfect. You'll hear the call was perfect. Now, I suspect the reason they will make the argument the call was perfect is because the president insists that they do. I don't think they really want to have to make that argument. You wouldn't either. But they have a client to represent, and so they will make the argument the call was perfect. And they will also make the argument Ukraine thinks the call was perfect. Ukraine says there was no pressure. What that really means is Ukraine wants a future. Ukraine knows it's still beholden to us for aid. Ukraine still hasn't gotten in through the door of the White House. Ukraine knows that if they acknowledge that they were shaken down by the President of the United States, the President of the United States will make them pay. So when you hear them say Ukraine felt no pressure, and their proof is because the Ukraine president doesn't want to call the president of the United States a bad name, you'll know why. Because they need America. They need America. The framers did not expect you to leave your common sense at the door. Now, you'll also hear the defense. The president said there was no quid pro quo. The president said there was no quid pro quo. I guess that's the end of the story. This is a well-known principle of criminal law that if the defendant says he didn't do it, he couldn't have done it. If the defendant learns that he's been caught and he says he didn't do it, he couldn't have done it. That doesn't hold up in any court in the land. It shouldn't hold up here. You also hear a variation of the argument, no harm, no foul. They got the money. They got the money. And they got the meeting even though they didn't. They got the meeting on the sideline of the UN. It's kind of a drive-by, but they got a meeting. No harm, no foul, right? A meeting on the sidelines is pretty much the same thing, right, as a head of state meeting the Oval Office? Of course it's not. Why do you think at that meeting at the United Nations, the president of Ukraine was still saying, hey, when am I going to get to come to town? He certainly recognizes the difference, and we should too. What's more, there's every bit of harm and every bit of foul in withholding aid from an ally at war and releasing it only when you're caught. Russia knows now about the wedge in our relations with Ukraine. The moment Russia found out about this, and I have to imagine, given how good their intel services are, they did not have to wait for Politico to break the story any more than Ukraine did. In fact, there's so deep a penetration of Ukraine, I would have to expect the Russians would have found out at least as early as the Ukrainians did, if not earlier. The moment Ukraine learned and Russia learned, there was harm. Because Ukraine knew they couldn't trust us. Russia knew they could take advantage of us. There was immediate harm. And because someone is caught, because a scheme is thwarted, doesn't make that scheme any less criminal and corrupt. You get no pass when you get caught. Now, I expect one of the defenses you'll see is they will play you certain testimony from the House, where my colleagues on the other side of the aisle ask questions like, did the president ever say he was bribing Ukraine? Did you ever see him actually bribe Ukraine? Did you hear him say that he was going to bribe Ukraine? Did you personally see this yourself? And if you didn't see it, if he didn't lay it out for you, then it couldn't have happened. 2 + 2 does not equal 4. You are not allowed to consider anything except for a televised confession by the president. And even then, don't consider it. So I imagine you'll hear some of that testimony where witnesses are asked, they work for the Defense Department. Well, did the president ever tell you that he was conditioning the aid? Never mind that these are people who don't necessarily even talk to the president. But I expect you'll see some of that. As I mentioned before, you'll hear the defense. We claim privilege. You can't impeach the president over the exercise of privilege. Never mind the fact that they never claimed privilege. They never asserted privilege. And you know why? You know why they never actually invoked privilege in the House? Is because they know that if they did, they'd have to produce the documents and they'd have to show what they were redacting, and they didn't want to do even that. They knew the overwhelming majority of the documents and witness testimony, there was no even colorable claim of privilege. So they didn't want to even invoke it. All they would say is, maybe someday. But you will hear that you can't be impeached for a claim of privilege they never made. So what do all these defenses mean? What do they mean? What do they mean collectively when you add them all up? What they mean is, under Article 2, the president can do whatever he wants. That's really it. That's really it, stripped of all the detail and all the history.